Last summer, my garden stayed productive through a 6-week dry spell without a single dollar spent on municipal water. I harvested tomatoes, peppers, squash, and beans straight through August, while my neighbors watched their plants wilt and brown despite running sprinklers every other day. The difference was not a fancy irrigation system or some expensive underground cistern. It was a simple rainwater collection and storage setup I built in one weekend, using methods I learned directly from Amish families in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. For most of my gardening life, I did what everyone does. I planted in spring, watered with the hose all summer, watched my water bill climb, and then panicked every time the forecast showed a dry stretch. I thought that was just what gardening required. But a few years back, during one of my research visits to the Lancaster County settlements, I watched an Amish family water a quarter-acre garden in the middle of July during a drought without any connection to a well pump or municipal line. Their plants were lush and green, and every drop of water they used had fallen from the sky weeks earlier. That moment rewired my entire approach to summer gardening. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how the Amish capture, store, and distribute rainwater to keep their gardens green all summer long, and how you can set up the same system in your own backyard with materials you can find at any hardware store. And stay with me to the end, because I will share a remarkably simple Amish technique for getting rainwater directly to the root zone of your plants using nothing but old clay pots. I have never seen it in a single modern gardening book, and it changed how I water everything. I will be honest with you, for most of my 30-plus years of gardening, I completely ignored rainwater. I had a hose, I had a spigot. Why would I bother collecting rain? I thought rain barrels were something for people who lived off-grid or wanted to feel virtuous about conservation. I never considered that the water itself might actually be better for my plants, or that the way I delivered it mattered as much as the amount. If you have been thinking the same way, you are not alone. I was right there with you. Then I spent extended time around Amish homesteads and saw something that completely reset my thinking. These families were not collecting rainwater as some kind of environmental statement. They were doing it because it was the most practical, reliable, and effective way to keep food growing for large households through the unpredictable summers of the mid-Atlantic and Midwest. There is a concept in Amish farming life that connects directly to water management. It is rooted in a word called Gelassenheit, which roughly means yielding to the natural order. But when it comes to rainwater, the practical expression of this idea is less about spiritual surrender and more about sheer common sense. These are large families, 8 or 10, 12 people sitting down to dinner. Every row in that garden has to produce. They cannot afford to lose a crop to drought, and they do not have the option of turning on a hose connected to a city water system. So they learned, generation after generation, to work with the water that nature provides instead of depending on water piped in from somewhere else. An Amish farmer named Eli, who I got to know over several visits to a settlement near Ephrata, Pennsylvania, put it to me plainly. He said, "The rain falls for free, and it falls on everybody. The only question is whether you catch it or let it run off into the ditch." That is not philosophy. That is farm economics. And it turns out, the way they catch, hold, and use that water is something any backyard gardener can replicate. Here is what you need to understand before we get into the building. A single inch of rainfall on a 1,000-square-foot roof produces roughly 620 gallons of water. Most homes have far more than 1,000 square feet of roof. Even a modest garden shed with a 150-square-foot footprint will yield over 90 gallons from one good rainstorm. The Amish do not let any of that go to waste. Their entire system is built around one principle: capture as much as you can when it rains so you have plenty when it does not. The first thing to get right is your collection surface and your guttering. The Amish use every roofline available: the house, the barn, the garden shed, even a simple lean-to built specifically for this purpose. For your backyard, you do not need all of that. Start with one downspout from your house or garage roof. Choose the downspout closest to your garden to minimize the distance you will need to move water later. If your gutters are in rough shape, clean them out thoroughly before the growing season. Leaves, shingle grit, and debris will clog your system and contaminate your storage. The Amish keep their gutters clear as part of regular spring maintenance, and they install a simple mesh screen over the gutter opening to filter out large debris before it enters the downspout. You can buy gutter guard mesh at any hardware store. cut it to fit and secure it with small sheet metal screws. That 10-minute job saves you hours of cleaning later and keeps your stored water much cleaner. Here's a detail most people overlook. The material of your roof matters. Standard asphalt shingles are fine for garden irrigation water. Metal roofing is even better because it sheds water more cleanly with less particulate. However, if your roof is treated with any kind of moss or algae inhibitor containing zinc or copper, you need to be cautious. Those metals can accumulate in stored water at levels that are not ideal for vegetable gardens. If you are unsure, a simple water test kit from a garden center can tell you what is in your runoff. Now let me show you exactly how to set up your storage, because this is where the Amish approach really diverges from what most people do. The typical backyard rain barrel holds about 55 gallons. That sounds like a lot until you realize a single mature tomato plant can drink 2 to 3 gallons per week in the heat of summer. If you have 20 tomato plants, one barrel gets you through maybe a week, assuming it was full when the dry spell started. The Amish do not rely on a single barrel. They use a connected series of barrels or larger storage vessels, typically holding between 200 and 500 gallons total. Here is how to replicate that affordably. Purchase 3 to 4 55-gallon food-grade plastic drums. You can often find these for $15 to $25 each at farm supply stores, feed mills, or online. Make sure they previously held food products, not chemicals. The Amish are very particular about this. Set your barrels on a platform made from cinder blocks or a sturdy wooden pallet raised at least 12 to 18 inches off the ground. This elevation is critical because it gives you gravity-fed pressure when you connect a spigot at the base. Without elevation, you are stuck scooping water out by hand, and that gets old fast. Connect the barrels in series using short lengths of 3/4-inch PVC pipe or garden hose fitted between holes drilled about 2 inches from the top of each barrel. When the first barrel fills, water flows through the connector into the second, then the third, then the fourth. This way, all your barrels fill automatically from a single downspout. Drill a hole near the bottom of the last barrel in the series and install a standard brass spigot with a garden hose thread. You can now attach a garden hose directly and water by gravity feed, or fill watering cans at the spigot. Every barrel needs a secure lid or a fine mesh screen fastened over the opening. This keeps out mosquitoes, which will breed in standing water, and it prevents leaves and insects from fouling your supply. The Amish use window screen material cut in circles and secured with a bungee cord around the rim. Simple, effective, costs almost nothing. If you are in zones 3 through 5, where winters bring hard freezes, plan to drain your barrels completely before the first frost, usually by mid to late October. Water left in barrels and connectors will freeze, expand, and crack your system. The Amish in northern Indiana and Ohio disconnect their barrels each fall, flip them upside down, and store them in the barn until spring. In zones 7 through 9, you can often run your system year-round, though you should still clean the barrels once a year with a dilute vinegar rinse to prevent algae buildup. Now here is where the growing really begins, because collecting rain is only half the equation. The other half is how you use it, and this is where I learned the most from watching Amish gardens in action. The conventional approach is to stand there with a hose and spray water over the tops of your plants. It looks productive, it feels satisfying, but a huge percentage of that water evaporates before it ever reaches the root zone, especially in the heat of a July afternoon. The Amish almost never water from above. They deliver water directly to the soil at the base of each plant, slowly so it soaks deep instead of running off the surface. If you're interested in more of these deep dives into how traditional cultures approach the garden differently, hit subscribe. I have a lot more of these coming, and each one goes into this same kind of practical detail. All right, let us keep going. The simplest method, and the one I saw used most often in Lancaster County, is a buried perforated hose system. Take a standard soaker hose, the kind with tiny pores that weeps water along its entire length, and lay it directly on the soil surface between your plant rows. Then cover it with 2 to 3 inches of straw mulch. Connect the soaker hose to the spigot on your rain barrel. System. Because your barrels are elevated 12 to 18 inches, gravity pushes water through the soaker hose at a slow, steady rate. It is not high pressure, and that is actually the point. You want the water to seep into the soil gradually over 30 to 45 minutes, not blast out and run off. The straw mulch on top serves double duty. It hides the hose from sunlight, which extends its lifespan dramatically, and it reduces surface evaporation by up to 70% according to research out of Virginia Tech. Here is the specific layout. Run your soaker hose in parallel lines spaced about 18 to 24 inches apart for most vegetable crops. For wider plants like squash or melons, space the lines about 30 inches apart. One 50-foot soaker hose connected to a 220-gallon barrel system will water approximately 150 square feet of garden per session. In peak summer heat, plan to run it every 2 to 3 days. A visual cue to know if you are watering enough is to push your finger into the soil about 4 inches down after a watering session. It should feel evenly moist, like a wrung-out sponge. If the top inch is wet but it is dry below that, you need to run the system longer. If water is pooling on the surface, your slope or soil compaction needs attention. This next part is where most people go wrong, and it is something that took me a couple of seasons to figure out even after I had my collection system running. Timing matters enormously. The Amish water their gardens in the early morning, between 5 and 7 in the morning, almost without exception. Watering in the evening leaves foliage damp overnight, which promotes fungal diseases like blight and powdery mildew. Watering at midday wastes water to evaporation. The early morning window gives plants time to absorb moisture before the heat of the day, while allowing any surface dampness to dry quickly as temperatures rise. If you are running a gravity-fed soaker hose system, open your spigot first thing in the morning and close it 30 to 45 minutes later. That rhythm, done consistently every 2 to 3 days during dry stretches, is what kept my garden green through that 6-week drought I mentioned at the beginning. It is not complicated, it just requires consistency, which is something the Amish excel at, because their gardens are not hobbies, they are how the family eats. Now here is where the real efficiency of the Amish approach becomes clear, and honestly, this is the part that impressed me most. The Amish do not just store water, they store it in the soil itself. Every Amish garden I have visited in Lancaster County, Holmes County, Ohio, and the northern Indiana settlements uses deep mulching as a water retention strategy. After planting, they cover every inch of exposed soil with 4 to 6 inches of straw, old hay, or leaf mulch. Not 2 inches, which is what most gardening books recommend, 4 to 6 inches. The reason this works comes down to basic soil physics. A thick mulch layer insulates the soil surface from direct sun, slowing evaporation dramatically. It also moderates soil temperature, keeping roots cooler in summer heat, which reduces the plant's overall water demand. Penn State Extension research has shown that 4 inches of organic mulch can reduce the water needs of a vegetable garden by 30 to 50% compared to bare soil. Here is the specific method. After your transplants are established and at least 6 to 8 inches tall, spread straw mulch in a ring around each plant, starting about 3 inches from the stem and extending outward to fill the space between plants. Build the layer up to 4 to 6 inches deep. For row crops like beans and peas, mulch the entire row and the paths between rows. As the mulch breaks down over the season, it also feeds the soil beneath it, improving organic matter and water-holding capacity for the following year. This is a compounding benefit. The Amish have been mulching the same garden plots for generations, and their soil holds moisture like a sponge compared to the hard-crusted surface of an unmulched bed. One zone-specific note. If you are in zones 8 or 9 with hot, humid summers, use straw rather than leaf mulch. Leaf mulch can mat down and trap excess moisture against the soil surface, which promotes fungal issues in high humidity. Straw stays loose and allows better air circulation. In zones 3 through 5, wait until the soil has warmed to at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit before applying heavy mulch. Mulching too early in cold climates can keep the soil cold and delay plant growth. Now, I want to address something important about rainwater itself, because this surprised me when I first learned it. Rainwater is not the same as tap water when it comes to your plants. Municipal water is treated with chlorine and often contains dissolved salts and minerals that can build up in your soil over time. Rainwater is naturally soft, slightly acidic with a typical pH around 5.6 to 6.2 and contains trace amounts of nitrogen absorbed from the atmosphere. Plants respond noticeably better to rainwater than to treated tap water. I started tracking this about 3 years ago in my own garden. I grew identical tomato varieties side by side, one row watered exclusively with collected rainwater and the other with my garden hose. By midsummer, the rainwater row was visibly more vigorous, with darker green foliage and about 15% more fruit set. This was not a rigorous scientific trial, just my own observation, but it matched what every Amish gardener I have spoken with has told me. The rain grows things differently than the pipe water. Let me walk you through some patterns I have noticed over the years, habits that I used to have that the Amish approach handles differently. No judgment here. I did all of these myself for longer than I care to admit. The first pattern is watering too frequently and too shallowly. Most of us give the garden a quick pass with the hose every day wetting the top inch or two of soil. This trains plant roots to stay shallow, right near the surface, which makes them more vulnerable to heat and drought. The Amish water less often but more deeply, encouraging roots to grow down 8, 10, 12 inches where the soil stays cool and moist even during dry spells. Deep, infrequent watering produces tougher, more resilient plants. The second pattern is ignoring the free water that falls on your property. I used to watch it rain for an hour and never once think about where all that water was going. Off the roof, down the driveway, into the storm drain, gone. The Amish see a rainstorm as a delivery. Every drop that hits a roof surface is a drop they do not have to haul from somewhere else. Once I started thinking about rain as a resource instead of an inconvenience, my whole water management approach changed. The third pattern is treating mulch as decoration instead of infrastructure. I used to spread a thin inch of mulch around my plants because it looked nice. That thin layer breaks down in weeks and does almost nothing for moisture retention. The Amish treat mulch as a functional system component 4 to 6 inches deep, covering every exposed surface. It is not there to look pretty. It is there to hold water in the soil where your plants can use it. The fourth pattern is failing to plan for dry weeks. Most of us water reactively. The plants look wilted, so we water. By the time a plant is visibly wilting, it has already experienced stress that reduces yield. The Amish plan proactively. They collect water when it is abundant so they have reserves when it is not. That simple shift from reactive to proactive is the single biggest change you can make in your summer watering strategy. Now here is the technique I promised you at the beginning, the one I learned from an Amish family near Intercourse, Pennsylvania that I have never seen in any modern gardening guide. They use unglazed clay pots, the standard terracotta pots you can buy anywhere, as buried slow-release watering devices. The method is called olla irrigation, and while it has roots in ancient cultures around the world, the Amish version I observed is elegantly simple. Take 2 standard unglazed terracotta pots, about 6 to 8 inches in diameter. Seal the drainage hole of one pot with waterproof silicone caulk or a small piece of flat stone and silicone. Let it cure for 24 hours, then glue the rims of the 2 pots together with waterproof adhesive, creating a sealed vessel shaped roughly like a sphere with the open drainage hole of the second pot at the top. Bury this vessel in your garden bed so that only the top opening sits above the soil surface. Plant your tomatoes, peppers, or squash in a ring, about 8 to 12 inches from the buried pot. Fill the pot with water through the top opening. The unglazed terracotta is porous, and water seeps slowly through the clay walls directly into the surrounding soil. The rate of seepage is actually regulated by the moisture level of the soil itself. When the soil is dry, water moves through the clay faster. When the soil is moist, the flow slows down. It is a self-regulating system that delivers water exactly where the roots are, with virtually zero evaporation loss. One buried olla can keep 3 to 4 plants watered for 4 to 7 days depending on heat and soil type. You simply refill it with water from your rain barrel collection when it gets low. I installed 8 of these across my garden 3 seasons ago, and combined with my mulching and rain barrel system, I cut my watering time by more than half, while my plants stayed healthier through the hottest weeks of summer. The Amish family that showed me this technique had been using buried clay pots in their garden for over 20 years. They fill them once or twice a week with rainwater and let the pots do the rest. No hoses to drag around, no sprinklers to set, no timers to program, just clay, water, and gravity doing what they have always done. That is the full system I have learned from Amish gardeners for keeping a garden green all summer without depending on a hose or a water bill. Collect rain from every roof surface you can. Store it in connected barrels elevated for gravity flow. Deliver it low and slow through soaker hoses or buried clay pots. Mulch deeply to hold every drop in the soil where it belongs. And water early in the morning so your plants get the most benefit from every session. If any of this changed how you think about watering your garden, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what you have tried, what has worked, what has not. And if you want more of these deep dives into traditional gardening wisdom from communities that have been growing food successfully for generations, hit subscribe. I have plenty more coming. Thanks for spending time with me today. Go check your gutters, set up a barrel, and let the next rainstorm do some of the work for you. I will see you in the next one.